And on Audacity, I'm gonna do 3, 2, 1.
Oops.
And then we can press it on the last beat. 3, 2, 1, record.
Go. Okay.
Okay. Here, hold on 1 second. I fucked up. Okay, I'm ready again.
Cool. All right, ready?
Ready.
3, 2, 1, record. All right. Hey, Diana and Charm. How's it going?
Pretty good.
Good.
Not.
I'm so
not gonna
happy
complain.
to have you. I was like, not good?
No, I was gonna be like, not complaining. It's Venus Day, and Venus is in
Yes.
Cancer, and
Yes.
Right.
that is a relief.
It's really a relief. I woke up just feeling better than I have all week. And I just woke up and like checked my app and I was like, oh, Venus is in my 5th house now. I'm so happy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, yeah, well, we'll talk about where it's at for all of you. But yeah, okay, so let's start out by just doing some introductions. I guess actually to like really start out, I'll just state the episode name and the date. So yeah, this is episode 3. We're talking all about Venus today. And it's Friday, August 7th. What time is it? 4:12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I have Diana Rose Harper and Charm Torres here with me today. And yeah, I'm gonna let you guys introduce yourselves. So why don't we start with you, Diana?
Yeah, so my name's Diana Rose. I'm obviously an astrologer.
Obviously.
Obviously. I am currently living in the Los Angeles area. And yeah, I don't know what else should I share, Kirah?
If you're comfortable sharing your sun, moon, rising, that'd be great. And maybe just talk more about like your practice and your offerings.
Yeah, totally. So I have a Sagittarius sun and moon. They're actually pretty close together, with a Capricorn rising, which I don't know. This is like it's a long story, so I won't get into it. But whenever I learned I was actually a Capricorn rising instead of a Sagittarius rising, wow, that was one of the most significant moments in my life. Total relief. And my practice, man, where do I even begin? So I do astrology for folks. I also do tarot and distance Reiki. I also do like tutoring and mentorship around astrology and tarot and spirituality, and also magic sometimes for folks. And that's really fun. And I have a Patreon. I have accepted that I'm a writer. Took a while. Yeah. And then Kirah and I met at NORWAC 2019, and that's actually where I met Charm too. Like all of us, I think, met each other there at NORWAC, which is amazing. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. What else should I say?
That's great. Yeah, I was actually thinking about that the other day, driving around LA, and I was like, I remember the moment that I made the decision that I needed to move here, and it was actually at NORWAC. The first lecture I went to was like a Judith Hill lecture, and I don't really remember what exactly it was, but it was something about Saturn, and I remember being like, I need to like add warmth to my Saturn placement or something. There was some reason I was like, I need to move to LA so I can be warmer. And then I met you and you were like, yeah, I'm moving to LA. And I was like, should I move to LA? And you were like, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And fast forward a year, here I am in a closet in LA. So we made it. Yeah. So yeah, Charm, tell us more about yourself. You can share your sun, moon, rising, and talk about your astrology practice.
Yes. I just want to warn people. I feel really giggly right now. There's probably going to be a lot of giggles happening. But I'm Charm Torres. I'm currently located in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And actually, just like you, Kirah, I'm sort of in the process of moving to the West Coast, most likely in 2021. I am sort of chasing my sun and moon line over there, basically, because my luminaries in my chart are in like what we call like the houses that are hidden and challenging. But my sun, moon, and rising, so I'm an Aries sun, Aquarius moon, and Pisces rising. And actually, sitting, well, people can't see us, but looking at all of us together, I'm realizing that there's a lot of like big Jupiter energy happening.
Yes.
Of us. It's really exciting. My practice these days, I would say, like 2020 has been like shit. That's like an understatement of the year. But I feel like 80% of my practice right now is like really focused on doing one-on-one consultations, and I feel grateful that that is really able to support me right now in this like really precarious time. But I think at the same time, it has, right now I actually don't have a lot of capacity for other work. It's such a great thing to be an astrologer because there's so many different ways we can do the work, and to diversify like how we want to be creative and like offer things. But right now, I think most of what I do is just one-on-one consultation. I haven't quite accepted that I'm a writer, but I also write things. But yeah, I met both of you at Norwalk, but I feel like I connected with you both through the internet prior to that.
Yeah, definitely.
And I remember, Diana, when you came in my like internet radar was when I think you met Jessica Laniado event, and then yeah, and then it was like a quick follow that that was obvious, and then obviously Kirah, like in terms of your work with Enflux, is just amazing. So, and meeting you and having our exact degree, like Pisces rising, we have like an exact the same Pisces degree rising, and we're wearing the same color right now too.
I know. I was gonna say it's
so
like
good.
Actually, weird how Charm and I like have these weird synchronicities in terms of like us both being Pisces rising with the same degree. Same with Sam Reynolds, who also has the same degree rising.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the two of us have like creepily scary similar charts. But yeah, I love that Charm and I like showed up in the same color.
So
but
good.
yeah, I love, okay, so yeah, big Jupiter energy, also big Venus energy, obviously between the three of us. Do you want to share your Venus signs? I'll say mine. I have Venus in Libra in the 8th house. How about you, Charm?
I have Venus Pisces in the 1st house.
So lucky. And Diana?
I have Venus in Capricorn, also in the 1st house.
Yes. So that's why I like really wanted to bring both of you in, because you're both very like intimate with Venus, you could say, having it in the 1st house. And I obviously have Venus in domicile too. Well, not two. Charms is exalted. Mine's in domicile. And then Diana's is just like angular, and your middle name's Rose, so
it's angular and it has decent accidental dignity, even if it doesn't have essential dignity.
Awesome.
So
yeah. And also Diana is like, I guess that's like a lunar name, so you just kind of have a lot of planetary goodness and just like in your vibe,
in your namesake.
Yes. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about having Venus in the 1st house. Like, how do you interact with Venus? How do you feel like it shows up in your life, having it so prominent? And whoever wants to go can start. Unless you want me to delegate, which might be easier.
I mean, I'm sure both of us are already like, oh yeah, here's this list of things. As the Sagittarius, I'll go first. But what's interesting, so my Venus in Capricorn, like one of the things that I've noticed about planets that are in Saturn ruled signs especially if the Saturn in the chart is also some level of dignified. So like I have Saturn in Capricorn too, also in the first house, is that those planets will not really unveil themselves except with time and age, right? So I consider myself a kind of a late bloomer in a lot of ways, in that like I can look at pictures of myself from like years ago and be like, I was actually kind of cute, but I didn't feel cute at all until, I don't know, like my mid 20s. So I would say like one of my experiences, at least with Venus and Capricorn in the first, is that it's taken me time to kind of understand where Venus has landed within me and how to kind of accept and embrace that. Um, and also accept and embrace some of the other Venusian qualities that come with, especially like Venus and Capricorn. I love really well-made things. Like I love beautiful things that have been crafted from material by, you know, judicious and skillful hands. And it's taken me a long time to accept that and accept how true that's been my entire life. And then with Venus in the first, like turning to my own body as something that I can think in terms of what does it mean to skillfully work with this material that I'm going to be carrying with me my entire life. So those are the first things that come to mind, at least.
Love that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I love Saturn actually. I know this is a Venus episode. But okay, maybe that's a good segue for my Venus, because actually my Venus in Pisces have an exact trine to my Saturn in Scorpio. So that feels like a very strong, it's almost like they're like a 2-for-1 deal at this point in my life. But my relationship to my Venus, so this is interesting with like exaltations. My relationship to my exalted Venus is actually very complicated. And I feel like I could really look back in different chapters of my life in terms of how that relationship has evolved. But it is ruled by, so my Venus is ruled by a fallen Jupiter in Capricorn. So I feel like that really adds like a layer of nuance. But in terms of my experience, I'll share. I think growing up, I did experience like being like a hypersexualized like child, which is so complicated in like the landscape of our really patriarchal, misogynist world. So that's like an experience that's very like vivid for me, like in terms of my childhood. And I often wonder too how much of that I've also internalized in terms of my own, you know, identifying with how I feel desirability and beauty, all the Venusian things. But outside of that too, I have had some really beautiful experiences in terms of like, I was thinking of like romance as like a way of life, not just like in the context of romantic relationships. um, and I feel like actually the first time I ever read my, you know, like the astro.com personality portrait, like in my early 20s when I had no idea what a birth chart was that I just remember reading like the fact that my name is Charm was like very fitting for having Venus in the first house.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting synchronicity in a sense. But yeah, I did have a lot of like really beautiful experiences like in my early childhood and my youth in terms of like relationships, and in a sense, what's interesting about the first house is like about embodiment, but there's something about Pisces energy that's also quite disembodied. So that's where I feel like really complicated, because I do like identify with the whole like I check out, I dissociate a lot. I'm like daydreaming all the time. I would miss my subway stop because I don't know, I was crying in public, stuff like that. But it's like part of the whole like romantic vibe, and just like I guess like there's, for me, like it being in the first house, I do feel personally like this sense of like being really infatuated and like falling in love and being moved really easily by like really even mundane things. Um, yeah, I guess that's what I'll share for now.
I love that. Do you have any Venus Neptune aspects?
um, my Neptune is in Capricorn,
Okay.
but so they're like a sign based kind of sextile.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And I
Yeah,
actually have
yeah.
like a 10-degree conjunction between
Okay.
Neptune and Venus.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
Neptune is closer to my ascendant than my Venus is.
Right. Yeah, I have the square. Well, my Venus placement's kind of it's kind of complicated. Um, but I do want to kind of talk about having Venus in Libra and domicile. Um, but it is in the eighth house, and it's exactly square my nodes and my Uranus and my Neptune.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a wide trine with Saturn too, which is cool. Um, but yeah, I feel like I can relate in a sense to like being sexualized as a child, or is it like early on, pretty young. But in the sense that like I think the Venus principle in my life was so it's in the eighth house, so I experienced a lot of shame around it. Um, Even though it just came so naturally to me. Both my parents have Venus in fall and in detriment, so it's like all the Venusian stuff that like I just, I guess as a kid especially, was like very naturally Venusian, in the sense that I was very sociable, and also like I feel like I was boy crazy from like 3 years old. Like I remember being in pre-K being like, that's my boyfriend. Like um so yeah, I can relate to that in a sense, but experiencing a lot of like, shame and like guilt around, being in a woman's body, or like, being raised as a female, but having kind of like restrictions around how to express that. But I kind of do want to like reverse a little bit and talk about just general Venus significations, in case there's anyone out there that is like a little bit lost right now. So I'll just start by saying like Venus is the principle of unification, of love, and of beauty, and relating to things, relating to other people. Yeah, do you guys want to add anything to that?
I always use the word harmony whenever I'm talking about Venus, and like what does it mean to create harmony in some way. And when it comes to like unification and beauty and things like that, like also thinking in terms of like what magnetizes, like what brings something towards another thing or person. And whenever I say person, I like to think of that in as broad of a way as possible. So not just other human people, but like, we always talk about roses, for example, whenever we think about Venus, and like roses are appealing because of like their shape and their color and their texture and their smell. And like all of those things really magnetize people and pollinators towards like roses and other like sweet smelling flowers. So yeah, that's one thing I like to mention
Yeah,
with
I love
Venus.
that harmony and attraction. Really, like it's the principle of attraction, and what you're attracted to, what makes you attractive to other people. That's all Venus.
Today, actually, I feel like right before our session, I was looking at a lot of recipes for baking. It's like inspired by Venus in Cancer. I feel like Venus really represents all sweetness, like all sweet things, but also decadence and indulgence, like things that feel really rich texturally, like in every aspect of senses.
Yes, yes.
And yeah, I guess I was saying like I feel like romance is such a big Venus signification as well, even outside of like relational context. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, everything sweet, everything delicious, everything like it's love, really.
Yeah.
I like to describe the difference between Venus and Jupiter as like, well, Jupiter is the greater benefic and Venus is the lesser benefic. And so what that looks like is like Jupiter will like, you know, it's more about like windfalls or like huge big opportunities that kind of change your life. Whereas Venus is like, I feel like having like a really good Venus like weekend would be going out on a date with someone that's like really sexy on a Friday night, having like a delicious meal, maybe going out dancing, having like a late night dessert, going home, having sex all night, maybe waking up, having sex all day, having like a delicious brunch, like all these things that just like make you feel pleasure and like joy and just delicious and lovely. That's Venus.
Yeah.
It's not, maybe doesn't necessarily like change the course of your life, but it's just about like experiencing pleasure and like good things.
But I feel like it's also deeply transformative and healing. I think especially in our world where desires and pleasure is really like very limited to certain types of access to certain privileges in our world, where for some people, like, you know, like someone might not have time or capacity to be able to live in that sense, and so people have to be like really creative to find those pockets of pleasure in their life. But in a sense, like when people engage with their Venus in like that sort of healing way, like it can be really, I think it can be life changing too, for sure.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
I also like to, I was just going to say, I also like to remind people that Venus as a planet, like the actual like object in the sky, has been associated with war and war goddesses too, like the association with Inanna, like the Sumerian goddess who was extremely just like, I want what I want and I do what I want and I want everything and nobody will deny me.
Yes.
And, you know, I like to bring that up because I think sometimes it can be easy to make Venus be this really soft something, which then makes it easier to dismiss within a patriarchal context. But desire is intense, right? And wanting what you want, like that form of liberation is like really, really bonkers to experience. And I think it's really, it can be really interesting, I guess, to chew on this idea of, you know, Venus as a planet that can be so invested in harmony that it is willing to do some destruction along the way, or willing to harm in some way towards an ideal of balance and harmony and unification and things like that.
I think that's such a good point, because I feel like it really kind of brings out the notion that like the planets are pretty like there's a multitude of contexts that you can really play like discuss planets, and that really actually made me think a lot about in the context of like a patriarchal world, like how like feminized labor is so precarious and like undervalued in our society. Like when I think of like caretaking, child caretaking, daycare, you know, like sort of like quote unquote like feminized labor, like cleaning, it's like these groups of people like don't make a lot of money in our kind of world. So that's, yeah, that's really good that you brought it up.
Yeah, I think it was Alice Sparkly Cat Ace brought also has talked about this in terms of like Venus in being a planet of war, because I think the way that they conceptualized it was like you need Venus to unite like your team against the other team. And so yeah, the act of unification and like making things alike, like look at war uniforms, you know, and like, you know, you can look through history, war propaganda, all of stuff, like you need Venus for war as well.
And I think Ace also emphasized in their analysis like how Venus can serve the ruling class versus Mars sort of are like the other.
Makes a lot of sense.
I think there's also something about even thinking about the violence of beauty standards for example, like what is collectively considered beautiful and how that gets weaponized against particular populations, for whatever number of reasons. You know, I was actually just thinking about, I forget where I saw it. Might have been on Facebook. Maybe I'm in a Facebook group that is like entirely like non-white passing POC, and maybe it was on Twitter, whatever. It doesn't matter where I saw it, but something along the lines of like, how old were you when you realized that it's not that you're ugly, it's that you've been hanging out with too many white people?
Oh my God.
I think I saw that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
and,
like giving me
right?
chills.
Right? So, like how many people are walking around like misperceiving their own beauty, misperceiving their own attractiveness, and maybe even totally dismissing what they actually personally find beautiful and attractive because of how heavy and successfully conditioned these ideas of like what actually is beautiful, what actually is attractive and acceptable, and all of those kinds of things. Like, again, it's like going back to what Charm was saying, this is propaganda. Who is served by you thinking that a particular face shape or a particular skin color or a particular hair texture is superior to another in terms of beauty?
Yeah.
And
that hits so
yeah.
hard. I grew up like, I went to an all-girls school growing up, and it was like, a prep school, private school, and majoritively, I don't know, white girls. It was mostly white girls. And that was huge for me growing up, was like, I like really thought I was ugly. Like I really did. And yeah, I mean, that I feel like ties back into my 8th house Venus too. And it's like my type of beauty not really being accepted or belong. Yeah, that really hits. Wow. Yeah.
And it's quite global too, because like I grew up in Philippines till I was like 17 before emigrating to Canada. And like in Southeast Asia, like skin whitening products is so prevalent. And I remember growing up like engaging with that through like the adults in my life, like telling me to use those products as well. Like it's quite global.
Yeah.
But what you brought up about like the violence of beauty standards, it reminded me of like back in my early 20s in like queer femme spaces, we would have debates about how pretty privilege doesn't exist. In the context of conflating like being like through the lens of like misogyny and rape culture, like in terms of how people who are deemed also like objectively beautiful and desirable, there's almost like a packaging that happens that kind of loses like the layers and complexity of a person's whole personhood. It just reminded me of that.
Yeah.
It's very it's complicated.
Super complicated. Especially like I like to think, or one of the things I think about is how intelligence is frequently taken, like the perception of intelligence is frequently taken from people who are also perceived to be beautiful. Like you can't be both. Like you can be the pretty one or the smart one, because to be both is to be like ultra threatening.
Yep.
And so one or the other is taken away. But that doesn't work the same with like cultural perceptions of non-beauty, of ugliness. Like ugly often gets conflated with stupidity. So it's this whole trap. It's a trap. The whole thing's a trap. Yeah.
I feel like this is a good segue to talking about the different, like basically Venus and the context of essential dignity, and talking about what Venus in Taurus looks like, what Venus in Libra looks like, and Pisces, and then we can talk about Venus in detriment and fall. So yeah, why don't we start with Venus in Taurus? How does Venus in Taurus express itself?
materially
Yeah.
like as another Earth Venus. And with like one of the advantages of being a Capricorn rising is having Taurus as your fifth house.
Yes.
Like it explains so much about Capricorn rising people actually. um
Yes.
you know,
Yes, that's where people get, that's where when people say Capricorns are like insatiable in terms of sex, like,
yeah,
man,
it's like
fifth
give me all
house.
that body pleasure, like
Yes.
give me the body pleasure. And also thinking about what kind of indulgences a Cap rising is more likely to invest in, right? It's like you're investing in things that are sensual and material in some way. Like, you know,
Mhm.
for example, I'm wearing my like pomegranate, like my sterling silver pomegranate earrings today, right? And like they like part of why I love these earrings is like one, they're beautiful. I will just show them to the camera
Oh,
for people who
yes,
are
I
watching
love
the video
them.
version, right? Um and they're also heavy and like can you hear
A
that?
little bit,
Right?
yeah.
Like as I wear them, they make sound. So there's a multi-sensory experience with an object that is also like handmade and beautiful. And I feel like that has a Venus Taurus kind of relationship to it where it's just like, yes, remind me that my physicality can be enjoyed.
I love
Mm.
that. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot about Taurus too in the context of like the exaltation of the moon as well, because that's
Mm.
always that's an interesting connection. Yeah, so definitely Venus in Taurus, there's like a concrete way it manifests. And you know, there's like a really, it's like it has to be tangible and real.
Mm-hmm.
But the people I have observed who have these kinds of placements, I definitely see them kind of, I find them inspiring around like embodiment actually, because I'm always kind of in awe of people who are like in their body a lot.
Yeah.
And so some, you know, I would like in terms of comfort, like I'm thinking of comfort. I have observed people like just like being kind of always horizontal, like very tactile and affectionate, physically affectionate, like really love touch. Yeah, and they would have like candles burning and there's some scents kind of wafting in the space. There's some beautiful music. And you
Yes.
know, they're like eating with their food on their chest or being fed or something like that. That's like the image I'm getting.
Basically
um
the Empress card in the
yeah.
tarot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just like that sense of lavishness. I guess relationally though, in terms of Venus in Taurus, I think about it too around like reliability and I guess like when you're in a relationship dynamic, I imagine there's a sense of like I'm thinking of like acts of service kind of love language. I don't know if that makes sense to both of you, but this sense of like um, there has to be like a concrete way of showing how you're there for each other and with each other. That's sort of how I imagine Venus
Mm-hmm. I
Taurus.
love that. Yeah, I mean, I think of, you know, with Taurus, I always go to sensuality and the five senses. And with Venus and domicile in Taurus, it's like very much about sensuality and like how to engage with the physical material world around you through the five senses. So, like beautiful music, lovely smells, like delicious food, really soft and like comforting textures. Um, I don't know. Oh, and I guess like being around, like just your environment being beautiful and nice to look at. Um, yeah, I mean, Venus and Taurus, I immediately picture the Empress card, because unlike Venus in Libra, it feels very like solitary, not solitary, that's not the word I'm looking for. Um, sedentary.
Sedentary, like in place. It's
Yeah,
rooted
in
in
place.
place.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
One of the ways that I like to talk with people about Taurus, you know, because people will often come in being like, yeah, people say I'm really stubborn because of like my Taurus stuff. And I'm just like, is it that you're stubborn, or is it that you trust your own judgment more than you trust other people's judgment? And I think whenever we have Venus and Taurus, that's like, do you trust your own preferences more than other people's ideas of what your preferences should be? You know, trusting your own, like, trusting your senses to give you the right kind of information about what you want and what you don't want.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
Yeah. So what about Venus in Libra? I mean, again, in domicile, but this time we're talking about an air sign. So there's more movement to it, and it's way more relational. I mean, that's kind of, when I think of my Venus in Libra, it's like, one, I like want to be pretty. That's like something that like always comes up with me. It's like, yeah, but does it make me look pretty?
I love it.
That just reminded me of like your beautiful pink sweater, which is
which
like
one? I have so many.
the fuzzy, oh, I don't know, the like cropped fuzzy one that you had when you came out here in November.
Yeah.
And just thinking about like the selfies that you were taking at our Airbnb in Joshua Tree, where it's like this Airbnb was like orange, right? It's like this orange stucco building, so it has this like really textural thing. And then your sweater being like fuzzy and textural, and your skin being just like radiant, right? But like
so aesthetic.
Yeah, super aesthetic. And but like the point being like not the textures, but the transmission of the textures through the amazing selfies that you were taking while we were there. Like, I'm serious, because you're just like, you're trying to share in a more broad way, which I think is a very like air sign thing of just like disseminating where possible. And like in Libra, you're just like, I wanted to disseminate this beautiful image of me.
I love that.
I curated. I like very carefully curated the colors and like like everything.
Yeah, so it is very, I mean, it's very aesthetic. I think of it especially as being relational, like being in Libra. I feel like that it's one of my greatest gifts, that I'm like pretty good at just talking to people. And that, you know, I try not to take for granted the fact that I'm a social person, and that like that doesn't come easy for everyone. And I've noticed that just like throughout. I mean, I remember being in like first or second grade, and my dad who has Venus in Virgo, he goes, wow, like he's talking about me being in school and having friends. He was like, wow, they really like you, huh? And they couldn't understand that like these like kids that, especially like these rich white kids, which, you know, he was born in 1940, so that concept is just like, you know, unfamiliar to him. But he's like, wow, like they really like you, huh? Like you really are making friends, and like being really surprised by that. And yeah, I that's something I really appreciate about myself, is that I'm able to like form relationships with people. And yes, I also have my chart ruler like on the descendant, so my relationships are everything, but Venus and Libra really helps with that. And then also, like, you know, I went to art school, like aesthetics are everything for me. What else? I mean, I know, Diana, you have your midheaven in Libra, so
oh my God, that's why you're so Venusian. and the first house too.
Yeah, and my Venus actually squares my midheaven by 3 degrees, so
oh my God.
that adds to everything. I mean, one of the ways that that's actually been shaking out is I've been like very slowly and like not super like proclaiming it to the entire world. I have this mini consult called Work Your Angles, which is all about helping people like basically translate their ascendant and like through their midheaven, almost like if your midheaven was styling your ascendant, what would that mean about how you need to be showing up in the world whenever you're in a public facing position, like whenever you are presenting yourself or your work, and then, you know, taking into account any planets that are participating and the situation with like the rulers of the angles and things like that. And what I've discovered through this is I am really good at making really solid Pinterest boards relative to people's charts.
You are really, just so everyone knows, I've had this consult, and if you look at my website, the color scheme from that website came from images from the Pinterest board that Diana put together for me.
Yeah,
you're a stylist.
Yeah, well, yeah, essentially there's like that styling component, and I feel like you know, like that being one part, like the aesthetics, right? Like how do we like take the abstract thing that is the natal chart and then abstract that further into like an aesthetic concept and then translate that into reality with people. Venus and Capricorn, right? Like translating the beauty through the material. That's been a really interesting way to kind of understand my Libra midheaven. But the other thing is like I like to be the right kind of inclusive whenever I am like presenting work or ideas in the world. And I really like to invite people in to like think about things, and I like to invite people to have conversations instead of arguments. You know, even if that's just with themselves, because like both of you have experienced this of people coming to you for sessions and they're like in a battle with themselves over like who they should be and like how they suck and like all of these kinds of things. And it's just like, well, what if we think about it in a more compassionate way? Like that's totally like a Libra. I think of that as a Libra thing. It's like, how do we balance? Like, we're not dismissing that there's bad stuff that happens to people or that there are negative things that the chart can point to, but like, how do we balance that? Like literally balancing the scales of like what you are perceiving about yourself in your life. And I think that's absolutely like that's one of my favorite things about my Libra midheaven is that I can help people see things just enough differently that they kind of click out of being too heavy on one side of thinking about things. So
I love that.
I feel like that really reminds me of like how Venus in Libra would show up in conflict situations. Like I have observed like one of my close friends have like some significant Libra placements, but it's like really inspiring the process that they go through to resolve conflict. Because I feel like I have a bit of an opposite way of doing that. So it's like there's language and there's reframing, and there's like the stepping away and reflecting on like the intention and the goals, and then coming back to whoever you're engaging with and coming together and finding resolution, or if it's not resolved you keep going. It's like
mediation. It's mediation. Yeah.
It's really inspiring. And I remember my first astrology teacher actually called the air signs as like the social lubricants of the zodiac. And I thought that was hilarious, because I just imagine if the world was just like a bunch of fire, like, and water, it's like we'll just all be crying and yelling at each other. And then I feel like the diplomacy that like Venus in Libra offers is actually quite a gift in like, you know, like specific context, and I find it inspiring as an Aries. As a Mercury.
Yeah, you know, that's a good thing to bring up, because like for me, I do have Venus in Libra, and I also, it's opposite my Aries moon, and
you know, I just want to smash, I want to go Hulk.
Yeah. But what you bring up about conflict, that's like an internal conflict with me a lot when it comes to like my ex. We have like his moon was on my Venus, and then so our moons were opposite. And our Marses were opposite. So lots of fighting, but you know, or arguing or whatever. But yeah, there is this like, I think for both of us, him being a Libra moon and me being Venus in Libra, like wanting to go about it in a very diplomatic way. I think our Marses being opposite made that really difficult. But yeah, I mean, when you're talking about like mediating and going about things in, you know, like you said, in a very diplomatic way, that's something that I definitely try to do a lot, which also makes me think about Venus and Libra, or just Libra in general, being about justice and fairness as well. and how, yeah, that's like, I think something that sometimes people fail to talk about when we're talking about Venus, especially Libra, but so very much concerned about making sure things are equal. And that's like probably the biggest thing when it comes to dating and relationships for me, is that like I want my equal. Like I want someone that makes me feel like, you know, does not put me on a pedestal, but also like doesn't feel like they're above me. And yeah, it's like I just want things to feel balanced, and which is hard with it being in the eighth house. I'll tell you that. But yeah, I just wanted to put that out there, that like the justice and the fairness and equality really is definitely a big Venus and Libra thing as well.
That just reminded me, I was just talking with someone recently who had who has a considerable Libra collection, you could say. And one of the things that we were talking about was the fact that in the tarot, the Justice card is always depicted with a set of scales, or consistently depicted with, not in all tarot decks ever, but a set of scales, but also a sword. Right?
Yes.
And just how powerfully important it is to be able to cut things away that are impeding equity and fairness, and also the intense satisfaction. There's like this is something I was thinking about when we were talking about mediation a little bit, which is, you know, so Taurus has like the sensual, like you can tangible pleasures of some kind. And I think with Libra, you get like the intellectual and like abstracted pleasure of like the really, like how satisfying it is to come to a fair conclusion after or within like an argument of some kind, a disagreement of some kind. And, you know, both parties come away from that feeling like they were heard, feeling like their needs were accounted for, and also feeling okay with whatever compromises they might have been asked to engage in. Like that is like so yummy, but it's like it's not the same
right now.
I know, right? It's like not the same kind of yummy as chocolate cake, but it's like, you know, but it's still just, it's a different kind of delicious. It's abstracted delicious.
It's like the equivalent of like dirty talk.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's like I love you so much and I care about you and I'm going to listen to what you need, and, you know, not take personally negatively personally, like not get defensive whenever you ask me to change my behavior, or, you know, have a discussion with me about how something I've done or not done is making you feel some kind of way. Like that is just, it's so good.
Yeah, that's a turn on for sure.
I know. It's hot here.
All of us are like, yeah, let's drink some water.
And actually, I feel like this is a great example of because I always think of Libra, like Venus in Libra, to be like, yeah, like aggressively into like seeking that sense of like fairness. It's like it's quite aggressive actually, and so it made me think of like
sign.
Yeah, domicile, like also like planets in its own domicile, they're a bit aggressive actually. In terms of pushing their own agenda, like in terms of Venus and Taurus being like, yeah, aggressively tangible, and like that's so real. And like in terms of Libra, there's like such a staunch way that they seek whatever it is that they're seeking in terms of the conclusions, but also like conversations. Yeah, beautiful.
Well, this is a good transition into Venus and Pisces, which is Venus's exaltation. Yeah, I mean, Venus and Pisces. Well, to quickly talk about like exaltation, there's, how do I even say this? Like, there's different levels. No, that's not the way to go about this. What I will say is like a planet in domicile, which for Venus is Taurus and Libra, it's in the sign that it has rulership over, or it's in a place that it's really comfortable in. In Pisces, Venus is exalted, and basically exaltation means to be raised up or lifted up, to be given honors, or basically like it's a form of dignity that that has to do with like having an exalted position or like a higher up position. Did that sound right to you guys?
One of the ways that I like to think about exaltation is like that planet gets the extra fancy, really good quality version of the tools that it likes to use, even if it doesn't necessarily get to dictate all of the other resources available to it. So it's like Venus and Pisces, just to like maybe use a kind of stereotypical version. Like in Taurus or Libra, it has like all of its favorite makeup and makeup tools, like makeup brushes, but then it goes to Pisces and it's like the latest, most amazing, brand new, like high tech, high luxury versions of what it's already
Dyson
used to using.
hairdryer.
Yeah. I don't know. I never use a hairdryer, but sure.
Something. This is a $400 hairdryer that I was looking at. No big deal.
Yeah.
Or like they actually have an entourage that's just doing their makeup for them.
Yes.
Yeah, even better.
Stylists. Yeah.
Because like actually how I've been thinking about exaltations lately, yeah, and I agree with everything you've said, is like an access to ease. But you know, this is so contextualized because it really depends on the ruler, right? Because like the thing with being an exalted planet, it's not in its own sign. So yeah, when planets are in its own sign, it's like very inherent to their nature. But in exaltations, it's there's access to ease in a way in terms of how their inherent nature manifests. But of course, in the context of the condition of their ruler as well, that kind of adds a bit of layer. But just for our purposes, like that's sort of how I've thought about it.
That makes
and
sense.
that can be really contextualized, like what does ease look like for people.
Something that Cam White, who is was on episode 2, which is the sun, but Cam White once put exaltation in the context of like, you know, if domicile is that planet's home, then their exaltation is their like vacation home, which is like the place they like to go to just like, you know, they have like someone there helping them, like maybe like a chef there that kind of just like takes care of things. And yeah, it's just like this special place that the planet likes to go to kind of, I don't know, it's not necessarily a vacation, but it's like going to your favorite spot that's like not outside of your home.
Yeah.
And so
And
Venus oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say in rebuttal, I feel like that's so that's interesting because then when I think of privilege as an absence of experience, it's like when because like this is where like with my Venus in Pisces where I have some problematic experiences with it, is that I often have this narrative which is inherited from like my family conditioning about like being lazy or like almost expecting things from other people. And you know, like my relationship to that is like something I'm working through, but like there is something about that, like this expectation of things kind of being handed to you. And so that's kind of an interesting context in terms of how that manifests in people's lives. So that's why I feel like, and exaltations is to me like mysterious, to be honest. Because like when I read a lot of like sort of the Hellenistic source texts, some of them are not very clear, like in terms of the scheme of exaltation, although I know we're uncovering them slowly but surely. But yeah, I think about that a lot because I have seen clients with like exalted planets, and sometimes their stories, they share their stories in a way where they feel like, I just don't feel challenged, or there's no impetus for action. There's almost like a sense of complacency, even boredom almost.
Like too easeful to use like your ease idea, where it's like there's been so much ease that there's like not even an appreciation of the ease because there hasn't been sufficient challenge to achieve or receive whatever that exalted planet might provide.
I love that. I remember
but that might just be sorry.
No, I was just gonna say,
yeah,
real quick, sorry, I know we're gonna keep doing this because we have
We're
the same
excited.
ascendant, and so no. I was just gonna say to piggyback off of that, something that Austin Coppock once said about like exaltations is it's like that it's almost like the perfect or like the ideal conditions for that planet where like they won't go to extremes in that. So I like to think of it as like temperate weather, or just like, yeah, being in an environment that's like very, very comfortable, which kind of goes with that. Like it's so comfortable that you're not really pushed to like do anything in it. Yeah. What were you
Or
gonna
there's
say,
even
Jen?
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Diana. I have forgotten what I was gonna say.
Oh my God.
I was just gonna say, like, sometimes comfort, like when you're used to comfort, it's not just like there's a complacency around going outside of it. There can also be a fear of going outside of it, of just being like, well, everything is so easy. Why would I do anything that might fuck that up? And also, I want things to be challenging, but also I'm afraid of things being challenging because I haven't been challenged and I don't know if I can handle challenge. And like those kinds of things I think can also come up with like privilege in general. And I think as we translate that into something like exaltation, I think it also applies.
I was thinking also of respectability politics with exaltations, like that sense of, because in horror, it's interesting to watch how essential dignity is applied compared to natal astrology. In horror, when a planet is in an exalted position, or in an exalted sign, and then there's an aspect to the relevant significations, there's almost this sense that this whatever it means is being put on a pedestal, and that it's almost removed from from its like reality. So it's almost like you're expecting too much from this person or this job or this situation, and that there might be like a power imbalance that kind of happens as well. But I think also just individually, I'm curious about like the expectations people feel from if they have like a planet in an exalted sign. Like I think for me, I experienced that to a degree for sure. Like I pretty much live my life like I need to be dressed up wherever I go. I would say like 90% of the time it's kind of like a self-care survival way of like, and it's like a way to like regulate my moods the way chocolate can regulate moods. I have to kind of always like be presentable, and I feel like that feels sometimes like pressure. And I remember being younger and being really self-conscious with like lovers and being afraid to like take off my makeup or like show like bare myself in like a really vulnerable way without like the adornments. Like I feel like that can be how like my Venus in Pisces has shown up, and it would take like time and age for me to like I guess work on accepting like parts of myself that maybe I don't have to put such a high expectation on.
I share that experience too, Charm. So I wonder how much of that is Venus in Pisces versus Venus in the first house.
Totally, yeah. Venus in the first house, yeah.
I love that.
As you were speaking, this idea came up, like knowing that we're going to be talking about Venus in Virgo, Aries, and Scorpio too, which is like this sense that when Venus is in domicile or exalted, there is a prioritization of there can be a prioritization, excuse me, of bringing together, right? Like that's Venus's principle. Right. And part of why Venus can have a hard time in Virgo, Aries, and Scorpio is because there is an ask for some kind of discernment or like unification through severance, which can feel paradoxical. And as that relates to something like respectability politics, Venus in a sign where it is dignified is like, yes, I'm going to be like part of this. And that means I'm going to follow these kinds of rules because that's how, we live in a society. And when we live in a society, this is how you be. Whereas with Virgo, Aries, and Scorpio, Venus is in a position where respectability is not as liberating or supportive of agency. as it might aspire for respectability to be, right? Respectability feeling more like a cage than a way to attain one's desires.
Yeah, let's a few more things about Venus and Pisces. I feel like we talked so much about exaltation in general, which I think is super helpful. What does Venus in Pisces look like? Like, what is an exalted Venus like? Because I'm thinking, immediate picture in my brain is like mermaid for some, like a beautiful, gorgeous mermaid.
Poet.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, a poet.
Or a dancer.
A dancer, yeah, ballet. Maybe not ballet, because that's a little bit too regimented. But yeah, I think of just like
artists.
Yeah, artists, like beauty that's just kind of like boundless beauty, I guess is a good way to put it.
Something that instills like a sense of transcendence through the experience of beauty, right? Because like if Venus wants harmony and unification and Pisces is like unitive consciousness, like then Venus is there being like, yes, we all did the exact same drugs and now we're all on the exact same like fifth dimensional plane.
Speak my language.
Actually, you know what? I was thinking of Jupiter. Because yeah, Venus is in the sign of Jupiter when it's exalted. And in ancient astrology, Jupiter's main principle is actually to heal and stabilize, as opposed to, I know in the modern way, we think of it as like expansion and like the grass is greener. But it makes me think of even like the Virgo Pisces axis of service. Like when I think of Venus in Pisces, there is like this sense of impulse towards healing through some kind of service that's quite collectively oriented. So yeah, I guess like when I think of the job of artists, like that's sort of one of their roles is to like move people and provide some kind of medicine for everyone as an example.
Yeah, there's also a surrender with Venus and Pisces, and like like even like, you know, an artist makes an artwork with like their own intention and, you know, impulse or inspiration or whatever, but then they release it out into the world, which is a surrendering of how people perceive what's been made. You know, whether that art be a painting or a novel or whatever, like once it's out in the world, it is no longer up to the creator how that is interpreted and how people take that in, which is really beautiful in terms of just generosity, like Pisces and Jupiterian things having a generosity to them as well.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good transition into Venus and Virgo. We'll talk about the fall now that we talked about exaltation. So Venus in Virgo is what's called in its fall or depression, meaning it's opposite its exaltation. And do you guys want to talk about fall a little bit? Yeah, I feel like with fall, it's literally about like when something's fallen, it's in a lower place. And that can be experienced as not feeling like it doesn't, well, I guess for one, being pushed to extremes in order to be noticed or respected. You can think about like if you're inside of a ditch and you're trying to be seen, it's a lot harder to be seen if you're in a lower place. And so you have to kind of push yourself to extremes in order to find that recognition. Yeah, I'll pass it over to you guys, but how would you describe fall?
I feel like with fall, there's also a sense of experiencing the inverse of comfort. So like there's an experience of discomfort instead. So when I've spoken with like folks with Venus and Virgo, there can be a sense of discomfort with the mainstream ideations of Venusian qualities. it doesn't mean that they can't embody it or they can't find ways of engaging with it, but there's just, you know, like, why would I ever want to be like a Victoria's Secret model? Like, that's so shameful, or that's such like, there's just like there can be like a distaste even for the mainstream, like most mainstream manifestations of what gets categorized as Venusian. And so pleasure not being like pleasure or other Venusian experiences, um, having to find ways of engaging with that in ways that don't trigger, I guess, like a disgust response in that person, right? So like, I don't know, even thinking about taking a lot of pleasure in, you know, thinking about Virgo, taking a lot of pleasure in editing, right? Taking a lot of pleasure in culling, right? Taking a lot of pleasure in organizing, taking a lot of pleasure in, you know, precise movement versus like loosey-goosey movement. So that like finding a way to access the inverse of what is stereotypically Venusian for someone's like a sociocultural context.
Yeah.
And I love that so much. I feel like a few astrologers have shared how they talk about like planets in fall. I know Chenny Nicholas in her book, she talked about them as being like humiliated or disrespected, as like also like the opposite of being exalted and put on some respectable position. Alice Sparklica actually just put out an article today, and it was interesting how they talked about exaltation as like consistent disappointment. And but definitely like their context is like, you know, whatever that planet is in the chart, it's like could be like institutional disappointment, which is a lot of what they talk about. So that really made me think a lot too about like what it means to, yeah, it's like you just have to work harder at something, and it's almost like becomes this practice or lifelong aim to sort of find, you know, what it means to be laboring. And you know, when we're thinking of Venus, like you said, it's like how do you derive pleasure in this sort of drawn out kind of labor to arrive at, you know, like the pleasure.
Yeah. Did either of you go to Greg Crawford's talk at NORWAC 2019 around, oh my gosh, it's so good. He has it up on his website, but it's about Mercury and Venus in fall because they have opposite signs of fall, right? So like Venus is exalted in Pisces and Mercury is in fall in Pisces. Venus is in fall in Virgo and Mercury is exalted in Virgo. And he, like, one of the things that he talked about was the story of the Eros and Psyche myth. And in that, Psyche, who is the beloved of Eros, ends up having to do all of these like really painstaking tasks in order to reunite with Eros after she betrays Eros, essentially. And Aphrodite, Venus, is the one who sets Psyche onto all of these tasks. And so that idea of like humiliation and then like uncertainty of how to like regain that unification, and having to engage with a bunch of tasks, and kind of like with exaltation where there can be kind of a surrender of amazingness to the ruling planet of the exalted sign, right? In fall, there's a surrender to a certain degree of like how much control you can actually exert over things. And as that's demonstrated in the Psyche and Eros myth, like Psyche ends up successfully completing her tasks with the assistance of like small beings around her. Like she can't do it herself. She has to be open to assistance in order to, like, you know, be humble enough basically to accept support in order to achieve her heights again. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, and that reminds me a lot of the way that Demetra George has talked about Venus and Virgo, and how with it being ruled by Mercury, it's like Mercury is like, you can't just go have sex and, you know, be like experience pleasure. You have like a list of things to do. And so like Mercury being, you know, having like kind of assigning Venus with like all these tasks, which, yeah, excuse me, I just feel like that what you were just saying about Gray's talk and that myth really aligns with that. Like Mercury is like, first complete your to-do list and then you can like have that piece of cake. And that's kind of how I see Venus and Virgo acting as well.
You know, in relationships, it reminds me of people who go out of their way to make the other person's life better.
Yes.
Yes. So there's almost like this orientation to the other in a sense. Almost as if like a certain sacrifice of the self happened. But yeah, I always just think of Virgo as like the optimization sign. And so it's like, yeah, like a partner who would like really do the things to like make the lives better in some form. And it's almost like those kinds of showcase of affection is probably not even, it's not the ones we romanticize as a society, you know, like a partner or a coworker or like I don't know, like a family member who like does the laundry or like, you know, make sure the soap dispenser is filled up, and it's like those like the details of like, I guess like the mundane details that maybe get overlooked. I think that's part of like being in a fall. Like there's almost like this sense of being overlooked somehow, and underappreciated.
Pro tip for people in relationship with Venus and Virgo: notice the tiny things they do for you.
Yes. Oh my God.
And like,
my dad has Venus and Virgo, and he's always being like, yeah, did you notice I did that? Did you notice the rose bushes I planted? Like, yeah, I think of that a lot, but I see that a lot too with people with Venus and Virgo, how they're just like so service oriented in the way that acts of service, like that's the love language. They show their love through being of service to people, and almost to a detriment. Speaking of detriment.
Wait, actually, what you just said, it's like we mentioned acts of service for Venus and Taurus, but the acts of service for Venus and Taurus are different than the acts of service for Venus and Virgo, but they're both earth signs, right? They're both doing tangible things, right? Where it's like an act of service for Venus and Taurus is like, look at this beautiful meal I made you. Whereas an act of service for Venus and Virgo is like, did you notice that I am like always keeping the dishes clean and put away?
Yes. And Venus in Taurus is also like, look, I've adorned myself in like beautiful oils and lingerie. Worship
for you, for me, but for you too.
Yeah. As a treat.
Yes. Yeah. And Venus and Virgo is like, I did your laundry, like, and I like hung up the silk thing so that, you know, like I did it perfectly.
Yeah. Or Venus and Virgo is like, I intentionally didn't eat legumes all week because I knew I was going to sleep over tonight and I didn't want to sit in bed.
Yes. Oh my gosh. All right, so let's shift into Venus and its detriment. Venus and Aries. Venus and Aries. Let's start there. Opposite Venus and Libra. I I have this like, well, you know, I'm not gonna go there actually. Talking about like all the women I've been with Venus and Aries. I just have this weird thing with like my Libra stuff and Virgos, and Aries stuff. But yeah, I see Venus and Aries as being just kind of like almost having no filter in the sense that like they are just so direct with like relating to people. Like the way that they relate to people is very direct and very forthright and like just does not beat around the bush. Whereas like for me with Venus and Libra, I'm very like careful with the way that I am engaging with people, and I feel like just very, I don't know, I'm extremely socially aware. I can say that, I guess. And not to say that people with Venus and Aries aren't socially aware, but I feel like the like social etiquette just doesn't really compute as much. What do you guys think?
Well, I like to think of, so going back to like the conversation, like what's the difference between like domicile and antithesis, or however you want to, like detriment, whatever word you want to use for that. It's like Venus in Aries and Scorpio is Venus trying to Venus, but using Mars's tools. And in Aries, those are tools of like flamethrowers and like spears and like aggression and forthrightness and like, I just want this thing and I'm going to get it. And there's like a ferocity that Aries carries. And so you put Venus in Aries. I just made some rhymes. So you put Venus in Aries and it's like, I just love things so much, and like that lack of filter is like enthusiasm, right? And that enthusiasm is sometimes like buoyant and sometimes it's like ragey. Like I feel like a lot of the Venus and Aries people I have encountered are some level of activisty, right? They want to like express their desire for fairness, the Libra thing, with vitriol, right? Like they're like, we could sit around and like just have Mai Tais. That's one kind of cocktail we could consume, or we could go throw Molotov cocktails, right? So there's like, I don't know, there's an urgency with Venus in Aries that you don't get with Venus in Libra. Like Venus in Libra can have more like of that balanced patience and just kind of waiting things out. And Venus in Aries is like, no, now.
Yes, I love that.
Actually, like in terms of like the gender binary, like I often say like I love Aries women. Like I love Aries. I love like Aries. Like Aries femme energy to me is so attractive, but like Aries men, I'm just like, but in a sense, I think this has a lot to do when I think of it in the context of like sexuality, like in terms of like how like feminized sexuality is not, you know, like it's not palatable to the patriarchy to be like a Venus in Aries, someone who's unapologetic and shameless about their desires. That's often what I think of Venus in Aries. There's like a shamelessness. That's like for me, because I have Aries placement, so for me it's really refreshing. But I'm sure like in like certain relationship dynamics, it can bring up stuff. You know, like there is a tendency for Venus Aries folks to be very self-oriented, which is actually what's antithetical to Venus's principle, which is like it really thinks of kind of like everyone involved, but in terms of it in being Aries, there's a prioritization of the self. But yeah, all the things you both have shared, like the loudness, I love that. And that like sort of Sina warrior princess archetype.
I actually looked up Lucy Lawless, and she
triple Aries. No,
she does not have Venus in Aries though. I think she has Venus in Taurus, because like I remember being like, she has to have Venus in Aries. I need to be able to use her as an example of Venus in Aries, and I can't.
What about Venus in Scorpio?
Oh, Venus in Scorpio.
I mean, I feel like with Venus and Scorpio, there's like the way that Venus goes about relating to other people is through this like emotional penetration, like needing to get underneath the surface. I guess with both Venus in Aries and in Scorpio, it's like just can't do surface level shit. But I think especially Venus and Scorpio, it's like I do not care. Like I cannot. I think a lot of people with Venus and Scorpio like hate dating because the whole like let's go out to dinner
like
and
small
like
talk shit.
Small talk. Oh god, no. People with Venus and Scorpio hate small talk more than anyone, I think, because they just desire, like they desire to know what's underneath, and they want to connect on this like very deep emotional level, and to not like anything outside of that just is like boring and like a waste of time.
Yeah. I like to think about the Taurus Scorpio axis as growth and composting, right? Or like growth and decay. And so, you know, Taurus is like, yeah, let's just like have these lush bushes of roses all over the place. And Scorpio is like, it's the end of the season, we're chopping things down and we're putting it in the compost bin and we're going to stir it all winter, right? So Venus in Scorpio is like, what's your compost? Like, what are you rotting right now? Like, what are you processing? What are you breaking down? And you know, people will talk about Venus and Scorpio as like really intense, and it's like, it's intense, but intense isn't bad, right? It's like you just have to find someone that can actually get on your level when your level is like 30 leagues under the sea.
Yeah, composting and fermentation is also my favorite ways of describing anything in Scorpio. But you know, I think about Venus in Scorpio in an interesting way because of it being like in a night. So like Venus and Mars are both like night sect planets. And so there's almost like a resonance between the two of them. And Scorpio being like a water sign is said to be like a nocturnal sign. And so with Venus being in a nocturnal sign, even though it is in its place of adversity or antithesis, it's almost like there's still a resonance there. But I love that you use the keyword penetration, because that's like my Mars.
Yes.
Mars loves
Mars and Scorpio.
Mars loves anything penetrative.
But wait, Charm, where is Mars?
We all
have Mars and Scorpio. Oh, yes. I love it.
All about penetration.
I didn't know that. That's so amazing. I didn't know your Mars is in Scorpio, Diana.
It's conjunct Pluto too.
But yeah, what was I saying? I got distracted.
Sorry.
That's okay. I was thinking like with Venus in Scorpio, like there's on a like relational level, like when I think of nocturnal or night sex, it's like there's a lot that's not visible. So it's almost like relationally, you know, part of the processing, even on a cellular level with composting. It's like Venus wants to just see what you're hiding, and what's unseen, and like and in some ways it can be like kind of packaged as like, what's your truth? And when I think of Mars as like really kind of wanting to get to the heart of the matter and like cut through all the bullshit and the pleasantries. I guess that's one way Venus in Aries and Scorpio kind of function. It's like, cut the bullshit, let's get straight to the point.
Like we don't need all of these fluffy niceties. Like, stop with all of the cute emojis and exclamation points. Just say what you mean.
Yes. Yeah.
And like, do the inner work so you can actually say what you mean.
Yes. Yes. Oh,
Totally.
love it.
And yeah, and I guess in our world that can be like seen, like in terms of intense being seen as bad, or like you know, perceived as bad, because it's like we're all kind of in this culture where we really kind of want to package things in a way that feels good. And so there's a tendency to like lean against like things that are uncomfortable. But yeah, Venus in Scorpio like loves that shit.
Yes.
I think
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things that Venus and Scorpio really has to watch out for is being more concerned with the penetration and the depth than with the connection, right? Because like the aim of Venus always is some level of connection. And so if you can remember, like, you know, even with Venus and Virgo, Aries, or Scorpio, like the point of this is to forge connection, right? So it's like, are you obsessing over someone that you can't connect with? Or are you in like depthful conversation with someone that you are deeply connecting with? And those are two different manifestations.
Yes.
Awesome. So piggybacking off of that, I wanted to talk about how folks can work with Venus, especially if it's in a difficult sign, like its detriment or fall, or if it's in a difficult house, or having, you know, difficult aspects with malefics, or even, it's not that just malefics are difficult, I think, even like outers, or any sorts of tips you can give, and you can get specific or not, but yeah, I think we're thinking like practically, both practically and magically, how can we work with Venus?
Mhm.
I've been thinking a lot about kink lately. I've been obsessed with just like kink politics the past. Like, I feel like ever since Mars went into Pisces, which is my first house, like I've just been kind of re-obsessing with like how like kink can actually be like such a transformative way people can engage like healing from sexualized violence and trauma in their life. And I feel like Venus to some degree really, like when we're thinking desirability, like I feel like there's a lot there, there's a lot of richness there around like um you know, like sexuality, gender dynamics, and engaging with like safe consensual like contracts with people, and building and nurturing like trusting relationships where that can happen. I feel like can be very powerful. I mean, like, of course I'm engaging with it during like a pandemic where it's much harder for people to find contracts and connections. But I feel like our world is, yeah, like, you know, like in terms of the Venusian principles of like connection, like you can do a lot of that in a self work, but like I feel like the next level is actually engaging with other humans in that kind of like the surrendering. I feel like Diana and I, we had like a little short back and forth on Twitter about like trusting and surrendering as a kind of way of working with Venus as well. Yeah, that's the first
I
thing I
just have
thought
to
of.
say, Mars and Pisces for me too was about researching kink, which is just
We
wild.
love Mars. We love Mars in this episode too. We love the malefics.
Yeah. I feel like one of the most powerful things, and I think this relates even to kink, no, it definitely relates to kink, is investigating, like really investigating what you find beautiful, what you find attractive, what you find pleasurable. And like, you know, this is probably my Uranus ascendant speaking a little bit, but you know, really letting yourself go beyond what you've been trained to consider pleasurable or beautiful or attractive, and instead just like really being like, you know, like I know that one of the things that people can do whenever they're exploring kinks is like exploring kinky porn and like actually paying attention to like what turns you on without judging yourself for the fact that you are being aroused by a particular situation or scene or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and if like, you know, it doesn't only have to be sexual. You can also do this in terms of like, you know, what food do you actually find enjoyable and pleasurable, and like not thinking in terms of like, ooh, it's so sinful, but like
Yes.
actually what tastes good. Like a juicy ripe peach is always going to be better to me than like the fanciest, most decadent cake. Like I don't even like cake that much, honestly, in terms of like desserts, but you know, just pie. I'm a pie girl. But you know, really questioning that and like thinking in terms of too of like, why have you been prioritizing dressing in a particular way, or you know, if you're on any kind of dating apps, like really questioning like, why do I think this person is physically attractive versus this other person? And what would happen if I swiped right on someone that, you know, in their photograph is maybe not the thing, but in their profile, like in their bio, there's something there that's like, you know, catches you.
Yeah.
Like I think those are all really good ways to make friends with Venus in a way that goes beyond conditioning and stereotype.
Yeah, I love that. Like I thought about like working with shame, like all the shame that we carry, have internalized, we absorb day in and day out. Like food is a big one, like
Yeah.
people's relationships to food and their bodies. Yeah, that's huge in terms of that work.
Yeah. For me, comes up a lot through music, and like this Venus retrograde that just went by, it was so much about just like really indulging in my favorite music, and Venus transits tend to align with that for me, just like hearing beautiful sounds. I'm actually, speaking of like, I don't know if this is considered magically, probably, but I just started a Venus fast. So I'm fasting all day today. It's a Friday, until sunset, and I'm hoping to keep that up for many weeks and possibly years to come. So that's another way, you know, to work with a planet. Um, for me, I'm doing it because Venus is my exaltation ruler. As being a Pisces rising, Venus has some say over my rising sign and ascendant, and therefore my body. And I have kidney disease. And so I think strengthening Venus, which, you know, kidneys are ruled by Venus and Libra, and it's very much like a Libra thing, having kidney disease. And so I'm hoping that doing this fast and like doing ritual around, and, you know, just giving offerings to Venus basically, might help with, like, it might help Venus in terms of taking care of my body, because my ascendant ruler, Jupiter, is in detriment and therefore not as strong as it could be. Yeah, so
And
that's another way.
your Jupiter is in Venus's fall too,
Right.
right? It's not just Jupiter in detriment, it's Jupiter in Virgo. So I was like, fasting for Venus? And then as you were explaining it, I was like, okay, so this makes sense.
It was Jen's art. I had a consultation with her recently, and she gave me the idea, because I was starting to fast for Mars, and she was like, you don't really, your Mars is in Scorpio, it's fine. But fasting for Venus helps because it helps support my ascendant. And it's also like in Vedic systems in Virgo and fall. So that's just another reason to kind of uplift it. And something I didn't know about fasting, I thought fasting was a way to kind of like turn down the volume on a planet, but what it is it's the food that you're not eating is considered like an offering for that planet.
Wow.
Which I didn't know before having that consultation with Jen. So that really opened my eyes. And before this, like an hour ago, well, not an hour ago, but an hour before we started recording, I went out and bought some flowers, about 7 flowers for Venus, and constructed an altar and used some of my Sphere and Sundry, you know, Venus and Libra oil and spray, and I have some Venus and Pisces stuff, and I have some Venus and Taurus tincture from Alice Boland, and kind of just like did the whole Venus thing. I recited her hymn, which I'm kind of considering adding to this episode, like at the end of it.
I rewrote the hymn a little bit because I really don't love the Taylor translation.
Good for you.
But yeah, for those who are like listening to this being like, what are you talking about, the hymn?
Yes.
Right, so all of the planets and several other divinities and sort of like, I don't know, sacred figures within the Greek pantheon have a set of hymns that are attributed to the Orphic tradition. And there's a translation that happened in like the late 1800s that you can find for free online everywhere if you Google it. One of the things, like, so going from like kind of the abstract ways of working with Venus to like, I think it would, like, since you were just sharing how you've been directly working with Venus, Kirah, one of the things that's been really important for me, especially over like the past several months, where I've been experiencing lack of access to certain kinds of pleasure, the kind of pleasure that has consistently remained for me is the pleasure of scent. And so for me, perfume is actually a huge way for me to engage with Venus. And I have like a whole bunch of perfumes on my Venus altar, and I actually am subscribed to a Patreon for Lunea Perfume. Lunea Perfume, LVNEA, is actually a Montreal-based natural perfumer. And so like my monthly subscription to that I consider to be a Venusian offering and engagement, and every one of the perfumes that I get sent through that goes on my Venus altar, and I engage with it in like a Venusian, like tactile way. And And I think, you know, finding specific accesses, like specific gateways to pleasure, and devoting that to Venus, being like, my pleasure in this is an offering to you. And remembering that like our own enjoyment is part of like Venus's like desire. And so being like, I'm really loving this, and like maybe in your heart or out loud saying a little prayer to Venus whenever you're engaging or experiencing something really pleasurable, can be a way to kind of draw your attention to the Venusian sphere in a good way.
Beautiful. I think politically and communally, one way to work with Venus is to support like femmes and
Mm-hmm.
women and like
Sex
you know, like,
workers.
yes, sex workers, confront like toxic masculinity in your intimate relationships and like communities, and like even like our own like internalized misogyny. Like
Mm-hmm.
I feel like those are really good ways of engaging with Venus as well, like in a macro level, how we sort of show our concrete support in that sense, or even just our own learning and unlearning,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of, yeah, like that kind of violence on a societal level. I feel like it's pretty, you know, it's like it's like so old.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like it's going to be a constant kind of work. I feel like
Yeah.
that's one way to work with Venus.
Accountability processes and restorative justice would also be really like Venus Libra things to engage in. So not just like Saturnian or martial punition and like carceral approaches to communal issues, but really trying to find ways for there to be sufficient community support for people who are harmed, and also sufficient pathways towards healing and growth for people who do harm.
Yeah.
Understanding that people who are harmed and people who do harm are often the same people, but just at different times.
Totally, that's real. Yeah.
Beautiful. Do you guys have anything else to add about Venus, and you know, anything else that just comes to mind that you didn't get to say before?
I think one thing that is really important is to remember that the Venusian is not only women, right? And that like every single person has Venus in their chart, regardless of their gender identity.
Yeah.
And engaging with Venus healthfully is actually, I think, even more important for people who haven't had any training or conditioning in what is culturally considered feminine. And like learning how it is that your own Venus is showing up in the world will actually help you in all of your relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks for that clarification. I feel like every time I say the word femme, for me, it's very genderless. Like
Yeah, I know a
it,
lot of people don't have that yet. Like they haven't gotten to
yeah,
that point conceptually.
totally. Yeah, it's like the borrowing from like queer vernacular, like what
Mhm.
femme means. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful clarification.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's time to wrap up, even though I could talk to you guys forever. So yeah, to wrap up, let's, you know, drop your ats. How can people find you, Diana?
So you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Patreon, and also on my website. And the core thing to know in all of those places, like my handles, the like .com, the like slash, like patreon.com/, right? It's Damashena, and that is spelled DDAMASCENAA. Yeah, so hopefully you can find me that way. I know it's a hard thing to say and spell.
We'll have links below.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the best way to connect with me these days is to see me for a session, because I have really cut down on like writing content. A lot of my internet interaction has been like just being myself in like a very unbranded way, which feels liberating. But you can find me on my website at www.charmastrology.com. And my handle on Instagram is also at Charm Astrology. But on Twitter, I couldn't get that handle, so it's at charm_astrology.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for doing this on Venus Day. Two lovely Venusians. I feel so lucky and blessed. So thank you for being here.
Such a pleasure.
Thanks for having us.